Okay, shall we start? Um, so the arrangement for my part is I'm going to go through some of the slides that the exam question will cover. Um, so I think it's better for you to pay attention. I think it's easy for you to mark down what are important because I will simply talk about it based on the slides. Some of the slides that would not be covered by the exam, I have already removed them. So for these slides, the contents that will covered by or possibly covered by the exam, because I'm not going to only talk about certain knowledge points that covered by the exam. So it's very easy for you to predict what is going to show in the exam. So I'm going to show you some the relevant elements, the relevant contents of certain knowledge points, and certain knowledge point will be covered by the exam. Okay. For the first two lecture, I talk about decision analysis. Let me double check whether I have turned on the mic. Okay. So for the first two lecture, I talk about decision analysis, decision making. And the first lecture, I talk about payoff analysis, decision tree, and decision making model. And the second lecture, I talk about HP. Um, I'm going to talk for HP. I think you are now very familiar with HP, so I think you don't have to worry about it because the assignment already guide you through on every single step of calculating HP. So for that part, you don't have to worry. And for sure, there will be exam questions related to HP. Okay. For the first lecture, decision making, payoff analysis, decision tree, and decision making model. First of all, it's very important for you to understand what is decision making and what is decision making theory. So in this lecture, I covered decision theory, payoff table, decision making model, decision tree, and utility theory. Utility theory will not be covered. Okay, but for the first four parts, for the first four elements, probably you need to pay attention. So decision theory. I talk about decision theory, what decision theory is about, and what the rationale behind of developing certain model for decision making using mathematical model. How do we transform those decision making process into mathematical model? HP is one of the example, right? So it's very important for you to understand what decision theory is about. So decision theory is first of all, how does an individual make decision, the process of making decision, and also how do we transform those decision making steps into mathematical or logical steps in order to guide us through decision making to make effective and reliable decision. Payoff table. You need to know how to read payoff table, and I think that through the assignment two, you already know what a payoff table is and how to properly read, understand payoff table. Following in the lecture, I also talk about models like decision making models. And these decision making models are can be divided under three categories: decision making under certainty, decision making under uncertainty, decision making under risk. And a few models, decision making models, were developed to suit different scenarios. So for decision making under certainty, we can simply read payoff table and we can simply make decision easily by reading the payoff table, right? So what we need to pay attention is decision making under uncertainty and decision making under risk. For decision making uncertainty, there are a few approaches developed to guide us through to make decision under uncertainty. There are maxi-max approach, maxi-mean approach, criterion of realism approach, equally likelihood approach, and mini-max regret approach. You need to understand what's the rationale, what are the rationale behind these five approaches, such as for maxi-max and maxi-mean approach. They are based on an individual's preferences, especially for on decision making. For example, maxi-max approach was developed based on one's individuals for individual who are optimistic about making decision. While maxi-mean approaches was developed to suit people who are pessimistic, who are very conservative. So you need to know the rationale behind and also how to identify the best decision outcome based on the payoff table using these five approaches. Regret value. You need to understand regret value and also mini-max regret approach because even for decision making under risk, you need to calculate EMV and also EVPI and EVWPI. For these, it involves knowledge of regret value. So you need to understand regret value and how to calculate regret or opportunity loss values. For your assignment, some students, for the assignment, there were one question asking you to calculate EOL, right? And I have touched on some of the assignments submitted by students, and I realized that student, well, may not understand regret value very well. Aside from the three approach, we still have the criterion of realism and equally likely criterion. You need to know. I mean, the exam might not have specific question examine you how to calculate, but as a package, it's better for you to understand these five approach, decision making approach under uncertainties. And next is decision making the risk. For this part, you need to know how to calculate EMV, EOL, and EVPI. For EMV, expected monetary value, it's very straightforward. So for you, you might have some information on the possibility of each payoff, right? With the information of the percentage or probability, then you can calculate the expected monetary value for each alternative. So it's very easy to calculate EMV, but EOL is slightly tricky. It's slightly tricky. And the most important thing for you to calculate EOL is to develop the regret table. The regret table. I think some student might have difficulties of understanding regret value or regret table. Uh, First of all, let's go back to this part. So for each possible outcome, right? There are three possible outcome: high demand, moderate demand, and low demand. For each possible outcome, you need to identify the best payoff under each possible outcome. So for example, under high demand, there are three payoff value which are relevant to three alternative. So you need to identify the best outcome among these three alternative and use the best outcome, the best payoff to minus the payoff value of each entry. So you need to be aware of how to calculate regret value. With the correct regret values, you can calculate EOL. Because I have read one student's submission, I realized the student have some misunderstanding of calculating regret value. So I just want to highlight that here. So for EOL, for EVPI, now I would like to go back to our assignment. Well, since this is a revision section, so I also want to talk about the answer of the assignment. So for Dr. Chow, he might upload the correct answer, the standard answer to the Blackboard for you to review and to compare with the correct answer and your submitted answer. I will not do that, but I'm going to talk about it here in this lecture. So I'm going to talk about the answer of the assignment here. So basically for question 2, you're asked to calculate EMV and EOL and EVPI. Let me share the screen here. Okay. So for this part, for question 1, I think it's very straightforward, right? With the possibility actually are the number of possibility are gained through the market analysis. So it's quite clear here. The firm itself do not have perfect information, and therefore they refers to like market report. So the possibility, the probability number 0.2, 0.5, and 0.3 are gained through the market value, which are given by like a third party or whatever. So here it's very straightforward to calculate EMV, right? And then this is the regret value based on what I taught. You can calculate the regret value, and with the regret value, then you can calculate EOL. So it's quite straightforward for the first question. But for the second question, student escape this part. So here, it means that the firm always know the probability. So the probability number is not given by a third party, is not obtained from a report. The firm knows it well. So for the EMV, you need to use this series of probability to calculate an EMV. Some students simply use the EVWPI to minus the EMV obtained from the first answer. But that EMV you calculate based on these theories of probability number. So you need to do it one more time with the same set of probability number to calculate the EMV. So the EMV, the max EMV here is 590,000. Which one? Yes? Oh, okay. So this one is, what do you mean? Yeah. Oh, yeah, sorry. You mean like, yeah, so there might be some, so maybe there are some calculation mistake here. Maybe I'm going to review that, but this is the approach. Yes, this is the approach. What I'm trying to emphasize is the approach that you need to use the table, the number, the entry number here to multiply this set of probability number. Okay, so some student misunderstood like what probability means. Okay, so that is about EOL, EVPI. I think the process of the calculation is very straightforward, shown in the slides, and also the question. The question are also very straightforward. Just make sure that you choose the right number, you understand it well, and get the right answer. So for the others, I think it should be fine. Okay, decision tree. You need to know how to develop a decision tree based on the information. Um, for the questions in assignment, you simply use the numbers to talk. You use number to elaborate the relationship, right? But at the same time, you need to know how to develop a decision tree to illustrate the relationship among different alternatives and the probabilities involved in each alternative. So decision tree, you need to pay attention to the meaning of the symbol in the decision tree and decide how many alternatives are there, um, how many alternatives, how many alternatives at each step of decision. For example, there are like two decision point here, and for each decision point, it involves different type of alternatives. So decision tree. Okay, for lecture 2 AHP, I don't think I need to talk much about HP. I think you're quite familiar with HP now after assignment 2, right? So for HP, the most important thing for you to understand is, well, what HP serves for. So HP is served for decision making, right? So it actually enable the decision maker to select uh, the decision that reflect their preferences. And also, it's very important to develop the reliable and valid criteria. So that's why I designed question 3 in assignment 2, asking you to think about the possible criteria under physical workplace modification. Okay, then I will go back to the assignment and talk about the assignment here. Um, there are no correct answer, but I just want to know how much you understand these hierarchies and how much you understand the management approach on workplace management. So I will explain this hierarchy one more time. So with this hierarchy, it's about management approach or management activities to control COVID-19 pandemic at office workplace. So first of all, you need to think about the target of the management, which is office workplace, right? It's like office building, office workplace. It's not like campus. It's not in a factory. It's office. So what can we do to manage or to control COVID-19 pandemic for office? So there are 3 approaches to manage. You can use administrative activities to manage, such as you can design policy to manage COVID-19 pandemic. You can design policies such as regular leave or salary allowance policies to control the number of worker attending at workplace. That's one way to control COVID-19 pandemic. That's why we call it administrative controls. Or you can manage or you can control the outbreak through providing gears or equipment to the workers or employees at the workplace. So that's called personal protective equipment. You can simply provide equipments to them to control outbreak, or you can organize training to raise their and awareness of COVID-19 and knowing the characteristic of COVID-19. So that's about PPE. What about engineering control? Engineering control is you are going to manage the workplace through engineering management approach. In other words, you are going to manage the building. So for administrative control, you're managing people, you're managing policies. But for engineering control, you're managing the building. So all the activities should be about the building, the physical aspect of the building. So under engineering control, which part of the building, what kind of system of a building can you manage through engineering control? So the first one is physical workplace modification, and the second one is ventilation system adjustment. So for ventilation system adjustment, obviously it's about building surface system, and which you are very familiar for, right? But for the first one, physical workplace modification, it's about how to change the workplace, the physical workplace, aside from the ventilation system. So what else can you think about? So you might think about reconfiguring the layout. For example, well, you can take a picture because this will not be covered in the exam. But I just want you to understand, like, you need to think about that in practice, if you really work in the office, aside from touching the system part of a building, you can manage the space as well. So physical workplace modification means you can manage the space. How do we manage a space? We can enlarge the room. We can narrow, like a chop the room into small rooms, right? That's one way to manage space. We can remove the furniture. Then it provides more space. Or we can put in more furniture and then we have less space. That's called space management. Or we can provide partition wall to create small cubicle workstation. That's also called space management. And what else? Uh, yeah, and also that's one way to create safety distance. For example, nowadays some office really remove existing furniture to create more space for their employees, and they create enlarge space for individual employees so they can have more distance, they have more enjoy more fresh air. Or you can add windows. You can add windows to increase the natural ventilation. Okay, you might say that, oh, that's not building surface engineering. Of course, that's not. And that's why I want to enlarge your knowledge instead of only focus on building surface engineering, because that would be very easy for you. What I'm going to change and that. Okay. But this is about management. Aside, you need to know every aspect of a building instead of only knowing the building surface system. And that's why I only provide 5 marks for these questions. Even though you might have like 100% correct answer, but I would like you to give it a try. And there will be no standard answer. So I will take a look at your answer and some student will provide explanation. So I will give marks based on my judgment, like how do you elaborate the criteria. Okay, let's go back to HP. So for you, you need to understand each step of HP. And I believe that you are quite familiar with them, so I'm not going to elaborate it. Since this is a management course, right, and we have quite a lot of contents which doesn't touch calculation, HP might be the only way to evaluate your calculation skill and mathematical understanding skill. So HP will definitely be covered in the exam. Going back to assignment, quite a lot of students come to me and ask, like, what if they cannot uh, get a consistent answer, like consistent index CR? Well, I didn't give very firm answer to the student, like it doesn't need to be consistent. Well, it's okay that it is not consistent, but I don't want to tell you that it is not. I don't want to tell you that it's okay, because usually we will ask the decision maker or the survey respondent to do it one more time, at least 3 times. when we found the CR is not consistent, which means that CR is inconsistent, which it doesn't mean the calculation is not right. It doesn't mean the logic is not correct, but it means like the respondent, the decision maker, when that this person make decision or I indicate its value in each pair of comparison, it might not be very consistent. So if we get the answers from this decision maker, we calculate the CR and see whether it is consistent or not. If it is not consistent, we will ask that person to do one more time. Usually, we'll ask that person to do at least 3 times to see whether this person will come up with consistent answer. If not, we'll leave it. We'll leave it. If the answer is not consistent, we'll leave it, and maybe we just remove this respondents, the answers from this respondent. Okay, I'm gonna answer one by one. Is it possible to get half mark for task? I use EMP from the, well, first of all, I'm not very sure I understand you well, but I will go back to, we'll take a look at detailed calculation of your, in your submission. So I'm not gonna give you a very confirmed answer. Is Q3 come from part of my journal? It is not. It is related to my research, but it is not from my journal. So you will not find you will not find the same hierarchy from my journal. So it's not from my journal, okay? Actually, I think what he means is my paper, not my journal. Yeah. So it's not from my paper. I have a similar research, but it's definitely not from my paper. But actually, I decided. I decided. So I hope I'm not sure whether you why you want to know this, but it's not from my paper. But I decided for the teaching contents. But adding windows will increase natural ventilation. Is ventilation system adjustment? You can say that. You can say that, but this ventilation, I would not say it is a ventilation system adjustment. You can argue that this is not an automatic ventilation system because for HVAC, these are automatic ventilation system. But for Windows, I will not say it is because it's also you can also say it's part of the physical workplace modification. So for next one, if I have make a perfect consideration, however, the CI is still larger than in run. If I have make a perfect consideration, however, the CI is still larger than 0.1, does that mean the interviewee mindset has a problem? Um, yes and no. It could be that I would not say the interviewee might have a problem. Well, to be honest, it can be the system problem. So here you can argue that the system design have a problem, and the way people understand each concept are different. So going back to these, well, these terms we have used these terms. We come up with this based on a focus group discussion. You either come up with this term based on previous literature or focus group discussion, but the way that people understand each term could be different. So this might affect their decision making. So it's better for you to explain this concept to the respondents to have them to have a unified or agreed understanding of this concept. I didn't explain to this to you because you are students with this building professional background. But if I provide this, for example, if I really provide this to students or to adults who doesn't have any knowledge of building or building engineering, then we will spend some time to explain to them what this means and what each term mean to them. So I didn't explain it in this question. Usually, when you ask them to calculate this, either they're very to make a decision, either they're very familiar with this system, or you need to create a session to explain to them what this about. I didn't put that part in the question because I will have a definition list provided to explain each of these term. So, but for you, students with a building service engineering background, I didn't provide that. So, to answer your question, the understanding of these term might be a factor affecting their decision, like whether they think those are important or not. They might think that, oh, A and B means the same thing, so I think they're equally important. Well, that will affect their decision making. Okay. So it might not be the mindset problem, it might be the system problem or the one's understanding of the term. Okay, let's go back to the revision. So for HP, I will not spend too much time explaining the detail. I just said that I will not. That's why I want to talk about it here. Yep, I will not upload the suggested solution, and that's why I am talking about here in details. Okay, for procurement system, contract, procurement system, tendering, and contract are very highly related to with each other. So even though some of the exam question only touch on, for example, only touch on procurement or only touch on tendering, but you're required to understand this system or this process because procurement, tendering, contract establishment, contract management, they're actually different steps in a construction contract management process. So it's better for you to understand them as a process. So in the lecture, I talk about procurement system. And I talk what is procurement? What is procurement? Right. Procurement is a process of acquiring goods and services from a third-party vendor through direct purchasing, competitive bidding, or tendering process while ensuring the right quality and quantity. So understand what procurement is, understand the difference between procurement and purchasing. In a lecture, I use some example to help you to distinguish what procurement is. And usually, what typical activities are included in a procurement process, such as sourcing, identification of needs, sourcing, selection, negotiation, ordering, receiving, and payment. In the lecture, I use one activity asking you to identify uh, the activities during your purchasing, daily purchasing, if you remember it. So, what procurement process is, and talk about different steps involved in a procurement process, and factor for selecting an appropriate procurement system. Well, you don't have to memorize this, but you need to understand this. A typical type of procurement system: traditional project management, design and build, package deal and turnkey, construction management for fee management contracting. And basically, I emphasized traditional project management, design and build, and management contracting because they are more familiar. Oh, sorry, they are more common in the practice. So for each type of these system, it highlights the relationship among different departments, and also how the information are passed on to different department and to people who are making decision. Well, so you see, like we just learned how to make decision, and now we need to learn, like usually in a construction project, in a construction projects, what kind of people are going to make decision, or what kind of people can have a say in different type of system. So in a procurement system, architect usually is the one who is in charge of a project in a construction project. And also I talk about, yeah, and I use this figure to help you to understand the different professionals and their responsibilities and duties in a construction project. So these characteristic of traditional system will help you to understand what traditional system is, and also how this system is different from other system. Other one is project management system. For project management system, we emphasize a professional called project manager. And this project manager can be internal or external. And this project manager can be executive staff within the development or construction company, or it can be an external party employed from an external party, act as a non-executive staff, but also managing the whole construction projects. So this is project management system. Build and design system. In this system, the construction company or maybe the project team have a say, and usually they are in charge of the project. So package deal system, right? Management contracting system. So understanding this system help you to understand the evolvement of procurement over the time. Like a traditional procurement system was adopted at the very beginning. It was commonly used in early 1900. However, as the construction activities or practice getting more complicated, as more parties are involved in the construction projects, and as the duty and the role of different party change over the years, their role of involving in a construction project actually is changing. So you will see different dynamic model among these parties within a construction projects. And that's why there are different procurement system which are developed to suit different dynamic model. Just like a family. Some family only have 3 family member. Some family is a big family, have more family members. So different family have different model to suit their operation. So same here. So they are not exclusive to each other, and you may see some similarity among these different procurement systems. Okay, PPP is very important. Okay, first of all, understanding what a PPP is, and also why do we need to adopt PPP? And usually we adopt PPP in public infrastructure projects. Why do we need to adopt PPP? It was invented, or it was developed in order to solve some problem, and who are going to gain or benefit from this model. So it's very important for you to understand PPP, because this is a very typical, no, not typical, a very classic procurement model or procurement approach. So understanding PPP, why do government sector want to collaborate with private sector? Um, how does this model benefits uh, the government? So you need to understand that. I only provide a few slides, but maybe you can use some example in real life to understand why. Okay, tendering estimating. What is tendering? Very important. And there are 2 very common used tendering approach: open tendering and selective tendering, right? So first of all, understanding what tendering is, what the mechanism of tendering, what the mechanism behind tendering. and what are the specific steps involved in the tendering process. And then you will better understand the difference between different type of tendering model, like open tender, selective tender, negotiated tender, and serial tender. Of course, as I mentioned, open tendering and selective tendering are two most common tendering we use. Then what are the benefits? What are the advantage of adopting such as open tendering? And what are the advantage and disadvantage of selective tendering? So read it through, read these slides, then you will have a better understanding. And also negotiated tender and serial tender. Rules of tendering. So in the exam, there might be questions which are very straightforward, and might be questions which involve you to um, elaborate your understanding based on your understanding of the slides, right? So my suggestion for you to answer the question is, first of all, you have be logical. Be logical. You need to develop the logic, and the logic should be based on the slides because the slides I taught in the class usually very logical, like process and different type of approach, etc., etc. So be logical. And second, be elaborative. Be elaborative. Try to explain well. Uh, you can explain with your own language, or you can explain with some uh, cases or examples you have encountered in your daily life. Okay, so rules of tendering. There are some golden points that you need to be aware for tendering. So here I only talk about single stage tendering. I use single stage tendering as an example and talk about golden points for single stage tendering. Read through these slides. You don't need to memorize them, but it's better for you to understand uh, the meaning behind tender evaluation method. How do we evaluate the proposed tendering, or how do we evaluate the possible contract? Because when you conduct tendering, the tenderer will submit will submit the proposed contract details. How do we evaluate those contracts or their tendering documents? Next, contract and contractual management. What is a contract? In this lecture, I talk about general contract first. What are general contracts? And what are the essential elements for a valid contract? This is about for general contract. So usually it includes tender intention to create legal relation, offer, acceptance, consideration, capacity, and certainties. And then I talk about specific contract. I talk about construction contract, which is also building contract. And also I talk about void contract, voidable contract, and unenforceable contract. Well, to save you some time, my suggestion is no need to memorize them. Now I'm not talking about the exam, okay? Well, actually, you need to master the knowledge of this, but no need to memorize them. Building contract. But before I talk about tendering and talk about how to evaluate uh, tenderer, this document submitted by tenderer and contract. So it's better for you to understand what a basic or a typical building contracts contain. What are the elements that a basic building contract contains? What is modification? When we establish a contract during the construction process, we will encounter modification. What are modification? What type of modification will involved? And later on, we'll talk about variation as well. In the lecture, I talk about like how to create a new contract, what are the elements included in a new contract, and who are going to monitor the contractual process. Usually architect or engineer, they are more familiar, they have more duties in a construction project. So they usually play a role in managing contract as well. And what are the benefit of establishing standard building contract? Past contract management, better to understand. Okay. For past contract management, I think past contract management is the second last lecture, right? And then after that, I talk about dispute and resolution. So the exam will not cover dispute and resolution. So I will not talk about that part today. But for past contract management, I would still suggest you to take a look. No need to memorize, just to understand, like who have the power to manage the contract, and also what are the important activity related to contract management in a project, and what are the activities are related in the contractual relationships. So here it indicates the activities. Oh, I thought somebody asked a question. So these are the activities um, involved in the contractual relationship between the two parties. So who plays the role of giving delegation? Who have the authority of giving delegation? Okay, no need to memorize this. Okay, no need to memorize this, but better to understand. What is variation is? What is variation order? Okay, so that's it. That's it. So yes? Who has the power to what? Exit a contract? You mean exit a contract? What's your question? No, I said who has the power to delegate? Yeah, delegate duties or have authority to manage the contract or delegate some work in the contract management. Sorry, in the contract management. Student Lokto Wong, can you tell me the title, the topic of lecture 9? What's the title of lecture 9? Past contract. Well, I think my slide just touched on past contract. Didn't I? For your information, so student, I think I already mentioned that. And I'm going to tell you one more time, since you didn't really hear me well, and I specifically emphasize that distribute and revolution will not be covered. If you don't know what lecture 10 is and which lecture is distribute and resolution, you can take a look at them. So yes, lecture 10 will not be covered. Any other question? So I will stay here for another 10 to 15 minutes, or maybe just 10 minutes if you don't have any other question. Thank you. Thank you. I think I have already give quite some tips. If you really pay attention to the the revision part, then you will know some strong tips are involved. Okay. Um, cannot narrow down any further, otherwise you exactly know the exam numbers. So some of the slides are provided in this revision part because I think that you need to understand after this course. It's not only about the exam, but during the revision process, uh, I think you have an idea what are important or not. Okay, so if you don't have any questions, then I will end this session. Thank you. Bye.